The first glimpse. Zorath, the supreme ambassador of the Kralth Empire, stood at the observation deck of his massive warship. His sharp eyes scanned the stars, searching for any signs of the humans he had heard so much about. For centuries, his species had ruled over the galaxy, and yet the human race had always intrigued him. They were primitive compared to the Kralth, but there was something about them that made Zorath uneasy. It was as if their potential was limitless, something no other species had ever shown. The silence of the space around him felt heavy. Zorath's fingers gripped the rail as he stared into the vastness of the galaxy, thinking of the galaxy's future. He had always believed the Kralth Empire was destined to dominate. But now, rumors had started spreading. Humanity had begun to build a fleet that could rival the Kralth's own. "Are the scouts still reporting nothing?" Zorath asked, his voice cold and commanding. His second-in-command, a tall and thin Kralth officer named Sorv, stepped forward. His eyes, normally confident and filled with pride, were now clouded with uncertainty. "Yes, Ambassador, but the humans have been sending strange signals. We don't know exactly what it means, but it's unlike anything we've seen before." Zorath narrowed his eyes. Strange signals. The Kralth had a vast network of spies and intelligence systems, but the humans had managed to remain a mystery. He had underestimated them before, but he couldn't afford to make that mistake again. There was too much at stake. "Send another scout team," Zorath ordered. "I want eyes on the human fleet. I don't care if we have to deploy every ship we have. Find them." Sorv hesitated for a moment, looking at the ambassador, then nodded. "At once, sir." As Sorv left to carry out the orders, Zorath returned to his position by the observation window. His fingers traced the smooth surface of the rail, his mind racing with thoughts. The humans were not known for their advanced technology. The Kralth had spent centuries perfecting their warships, building fleets that could strike fear into the hearts of the galaxy's inhabitants. But humanity, they were different. Their strength lay not just in their weapons, but in their will to fight. Zorath's thoughts were interrupted by a soft peep. His comms officer's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ambassador, we've detected movement. A large fleet. It's human." Zorath's pulse quickened. He straightened up and glanced toward the officer, his face a mask of calm. "How many?" The officer's voice shook. "Sir, it's hard to confirm the exact number, but the fleet is massive. We've never seen anything like it before. They're ships. They're not like anything in our records." Zorath's breath caught. A fleet of unknown ships, and it was human. The Kralth had feared this day would come, but no one had expected it to be this soon. He had thought humanity was still too far behind to pose any real threat. But here they were, closing in on Kralth territory faster than anyone had anticipated. "Patch the feed to my screen," Zorath ordered, his voice steady despite the growing sense of panic inside him. The screen flickered to life, and before him, a cluster of ships appeared, slowly taking form against the backdrop of stars. At first, the ships looked ordinary, much like any other human ship the Kralth had encountered in their farthest reaches of space. But as they came closer, their sheer size and advanced design became more apparent. These weren't just ships. They were massive, towering structures, brimming with advanced technology and weapons. The human fleet was unlike anything Zorath had seen before. A chill ran down his spine as he watched the ships align themselves in formation, heading straight for Kralth territory. They were organized, methodical. This was no random display of power. This was a message, a declaration. Humanity was coming for the Kralth. "Sir, their lead ship is sending a communication," the officer said, his voice shaking. "Shall we receive it?" Zorath didn't answer immediately. His mind raced as he considered the implications of what he was seeing. He had underestimated them. These humans were not the weak, scattered species the Kralth had once thought them to be. They were a unified force, driven by something stronger than mere survival. "Yes," Zorath said at last. "Receive it." The screen flickered again, and a transmission appeared. It was a message from the human flagship, a massive craft unlike anything Zoreth had ever seen. The message itself was simple, but its impact was undeniable. The human commander appeared on the screen. A human face, calm and resolute, stared back at Zoreth. His voice, though calm, carried an edge of finality. "This is Earth's fleet," the human commander said. "We are coming. If you wish to survive, surrender now." The screen went dark. For a moment, there was silence on the bridge. Zoreth stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The human fleet was real, and they were coming. For the first time in his life, Zoreth felt something he had never felt before, a deep, gnawing fear. His mind raced to comprehend what this meant. The Kralth Empire, the unstoppable force that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, was now facing something it had never expected. A challenge from humanity. He turned to his officers, but the words were stuck in his throat. He was the one who had always led with confidence, but now, that confidence was beginning to fade. The humans were not like the others. They had a power, a potential, that even the mighty Kralth had never fully understood. "We must prepare," Zoreth finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. But deep down, he knew it was too late. The first glimpse of humanity's fleet had shaken him to his core. And now, there was no turning back. The alien ambassador's dilemma. Zoreth paced back and forth in his command center, his thoughts racing. The message from Earth's fleet still echoed in his mind, a simple declaration that left a lingering chill in the air. "We are coming. If you wish to survive, surrender now." The calmness of the human commander's voice only heightened Zoreth's unease. These weren't just empty threats. They were a challenge. His second in command, Sorv, stood at attention, his sharp eyes flickering between the screens showing the advancing human fleet. The silence in the room was heavy, the only sound the soft hum of the warship's engines. Zoreth had always been confident, unshaken, but now, with every passing second, his resolve seemed to weaken. "We've never seen anything like this before," Zoreth muttered under his breath. "This human fleet, it's not just powerful, it's organized. They move with precision. How is that possible?" Sorv hesitated, but then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Ambassador, are you sure we can win this? What if they truly have something we don't?" Zoreth's sharp gaze cut toward Sorv, and for a moment, the room seemed to freeze. "What are you suggesting, officer?" he asked coldly, his voice laced with tension. Sorv straightened up quickly. "I mean no disrespect, sir, but the size of their fleet, their advanced technology. It's unlike anything we've ever faced. We might be underestimating them." Zoreth's fists clenched, his mind racing. It was a thought he had been trying to push away. The idea that humanity might be stronger than the Kralth. He had always seen them as a primitive species, unable to challenge the might of his empire. But the evidence before him was undeniable. The human ships were enormous, more advanced than any ship the Kralth had ever built, and they were coming fast. Zoreth turned away from Sorv, trying to regain his composure. "Prepare the fleet for combat. We'll show them what the Kralth are capable of." His voice was steady, but even Zoreth could hear the uncertainty creeping in. The Kralth had always been feared across the galaxy, their fleets unparalleled in power. But humanity's fleet was different. The ships didn't just move. They communicated in a way that sent a shiver down Zoreth's spine. Every action seemed calculated, deliberate. There was no sign of panic, no sign of hesitation. The longer Zoreth stared at the screens, the more he realized the truth. This wasn't just a military confrontation. This was a clash of civilizations, one that would shape the future of the galaxy. He had been so sure of his empire's invincibility. But now, doubt had crept in. Could the Kralth truly defeat the humans? Sorv spoke again, this time with more urgency. "Ambassador, the human fleet is sending another message. This one's different. It's encrypted. They want to speak with you. Zoreth's eyes narrowed. Another message. The human commander had already spoken. What could they possibly want now? His mind flashed to the idea of diplomacy, of negotiating his way out of this, but he quickly dismissed it. The Krulf were not a race to negotiate. They were conquerors. Put it through, Zoreth commanded, his voice colder now, almost as if to reassure himself. We'll show them that we do not bow to threats. The screen flickered to life once again. The human commander's face appeared on the screen, his expression unchanged. He wore a slight smile, one that seemed oddly calm considering the situation. Zoreth could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was not just a simple communication. This was a test of the Krulf's power, of their ability to maintain their dominance. This is Commander Ryan Clark of the Earth Fleet, the human said, his voice firm but composed. We are not here to destroy you, but we will if we must. Surrender now, and we can avoid further bloodshed. Zoreth's heart raced, his pulse quickening. Surrender. The idea was absurd. The Krulf had never surrendered, and they certainly wouldn't now, not to a species they had always considered inferior. We do not surrender, Zoreth growled, his anger flaring. We are the Krulf. You will regret this. The human commander didn't flinch. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. He simply nodded, as if he had expected the response. Very well, Commander Clark said. We gave you a chance. Now you will feel the full might of humanity's fleet. The screen went dark. Zoreth stood frozen, the finality of the message sinking in. He had been given a chance to avoid conflict, but his pride, his arrogance, had made the decision for him. He had chosen war, and now there would be no turning back. Zorb's voice broke the silence. Ambassador, what do we do now? Zoreth turned to face his second-in-command, his eyes hard and unyielding. Now we fight. We show them why the Krulf are the most feared species in the galaxy. But even as the words left his lips, Zoreth's mind remained clouded with doubt. The human fleet was no ordinary enemy. They had power, organization, and something more, a drive to survive, to fight for their place in the universe. Zoreth couldn't help but wonder if the Krulf had underestimated them after all. The Earth fleet unveiled. Zoreth stood motionless before the large viewport, his gaze locked on the advancing human fleet. The Krulf command center hummed around him. The noise of the ship's engines and officers moving about barely reaching his ears. His mind was elsewhere, focused entirely on the ships now looming in the distance. A tight knot had formed in his stomach, something he had not experienced in years. Fear. He had seen many fleets in his time, alien and otherwise, but none like this. The human ships were unlike anything the Krulf had ever encountered. They were not grand in the way the Krulf ships were, but they had something more. Efficiency. There was no wasted space, no unnecessary decoration. These ships were designed for one thing, to fight. And fight they did. Zoreth's eyes narrowed as he observed the lead ship, a massive angular craft that seemed to slice through the stars. The human flagship. The Phoenix, they called it. The ship was larger than most Krulf warships, its design sharp and intimidating. But it wasn't just its size that made it stand out. It was the weapons it displayed, highly advanced, built to overwhelm any resistance. How did they do it? Zoreth muttered to himself, not even realizing he had spoken aloud. How did a species so young and unrefined develop technology like this? Zorv, his second-in-command, stood beside him, scanning the incoming fleet. They've come farther than we could have imagined, Ambassador. Their ships, they move with purpose. Every action, every turn is precise. It's like they've thought of everything. Zoreth didn't reply at first, his mind too consumed by the sight of the human ships. They were close now, so close that he could see the details of the ships. Their sleek metallic surfaces glinted under the light of distant stars. The fleet was massive, organized in a formation that would be difficult to penetrate. Zoreth couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. Humanity's rise had been sudden and swift, and now it was clear that they were no longer the weak species the Kralth had once viewed them as. The comms officer's voice suddenly cut through the tension in the room. "Ambassador, we are receiving another communication from the human fleet. It's urgent." Zorath stiffened. Another message. His patience was wearing thin, and his instincts told him this one would not be like the others. The last transmission had been an ultimatum, and it was clear that the humans were not interested in negotiation. "Put it through," Zorath said, his voice barely containing his irritation. The screen flickered to life once again. This time, it wasn't Commander Clark who appeared, but a different human. A woman with dark hair and a steely gaze. She stood in front of what looked like a command console, her posture perfect, her expression unwavering. "Ambassador Zorath," she began, her voice smooth, but carrying a weight of authority. "We have arrived. We are not here to conquer, but we are not afraid of conflict either. You've been given a choice. But if you wish to stand in our way, you will find that we are more than capable of defending ourselves." Zorath's eyes narrowed as he listened to the woman speak. Her tone was calm, but it carried a confidence that made his skin crawl. This was not the fearsome aggression he had expected. The humans weren't desperate. They were calm, collected. They didn't need to threaten because their power spoke for itself. The human woman continued. "We have fought countless battles to reach this point. We will fight just as fiercely for our place in the stars. I advise you to reconsider your position. We will not be the first to fire, but make no mistake, if we must, we will." She paused for a moment, letting her words hang in the air like a weight. Then she added, "We are not just fighting for survival, Zorath. We are fighting for the future of humanity. Do not underestimate us." The transmission ended. Zorath stood frozen, his mind whirling. This was no longer about power or domination. This was about something far deeper, a fight for existence, for the future. The words of the human commander echoed in his mind. "We are not just fighting for survival." He glanced around the room, his eyes meeting those of his officers. They were all watching him, waiting for direction. But Zorath felt his confidence slipping. The Kralth Empire had always been the aggressor, the conquerors. But now, humanity was not only challenging them. They were forcing them to think about something the Kralth had never truly considered. What would happen if they lost? Zorb's voice broke the silence. "Ambassador, the fleet is closing in. We must make a decision." Zorath clenched his fists, the weight of leadership pressing heavily on him. His mind raced. There was no turning back now. The humans had made their intentions clear. They were not going to retreat. They had the strength, the will, and the belief that they could defeat the Kralth. But Zorath could not afford to show weakness. The Kralth had conquered entire star systems, and they would not bow to a species like humanity. Not now, not ever. "Prepare the fleet," Zorath ordered, his voice cold and commanding once more. "We will engage them. We will show them what the Kralth are capable of." But as he gave the order, a small, unsettling thought lingered in the back of his mind. What if humanity was right? What if they could defeat the Kralth? And what would that mean for the galaxy if they did? The clash of forces. The darkness of space felt like a heavy shroud around the Kralth fleet as they prepared to face humanity. Zorath stood before the main console, his eyes scanning the tactical display, where the human fleet was now mere minutes away from engagement. He could feel the hum of the ship's systems, the low rumble that signaled the readiness of every weapon, every shield, every crew member. His thoughts, however, were distant. No matter how prepared they were, how mighty their fleet, there was an underlying unease that gnawed at Zorath's core. The human ships were not to be underestimated. He had learned that much in the past few hours. They were far more organized and methodical than anything the Kralth had ever encountered. And now, they were almost upon him. Sorv approached him silently, his expression hard. "Ambassador, we're ready. The fleet is in position. Our first wave of fighters is launching." Zorath nodded without looking away from the screen. Good. But remember, we don't just need to defeat them. We need to break them. Show them that the Kralth will not be challenged. Zorv hesitated. And if they don't break? Zorath's eyes shifted to meet his officers. There was a flicker of concern in Zorv's expression, but it was gone almost immediately. Then we'll do what we must, Zorath said, though the words felt hollow even to him. The silence stretched on. Zorath stood as if rooted to the floor, unable to look away from the approaching fleet. Every second that passed brought him closer to a conflict he couldn't control. The human fleet was not just a threat. It was a mirror reflecting everything he had feared about his empire's future. The Kralth were invincible. They had always been invincible, at least, that's what Zorath had believed. A loud beep broke the silence, and Zorath's attention snapped back to the console. Ambassador, the humans are initiating the communication, the officer at the comm station said. Zorath's jaw tightened. Another message. The humans had already made their demands clear. Was there anything left to say? Put it through, Zorath ordered, his voice tense. The screen flickered to life, and Commander Ryan Clark appeared again, his calm expression unshaken. Behind him, Zorath noticed a subtle movement, something almost imperceptible, an intensity that suggested he was not just standing in front of a fleet. He was standing before a symbol of humanity's future. Zorath, Clark said, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken challenge. This is your final warning. Surrender now, or we will strike. We've come to reclaim our place in this galaxy, and we won't stop until we do. Zorath felt a fire building within him. He had never been one to bow down to threats. But Clark's unwavering confidence was a reminder that this wasn't just any battle. This was the beginning of something far more significant. We will not surrender, human, Zorath growled. You will learn what happens when you challenge the Kralth. The transmission ended abruptly, and Zorath turned away from the screen, a sudden, cold dread filling his chest. His officers were ready, but Zorath knew they were facing something that would not be so easily overcome. The Kralth warships opened fire first. Bright beams of energy shot through the void, racing toward the human fleet. But the humans did not flinch. Their ships moved with purpose, their defense systems flashing to life as they absorbed the energy blasts. Some Kralth ships were hit, their shields flickering as they took the brunt of the attacks. But the humans didn't waver. If anything, their response was calculated, deliberate. They fired back in unison, their weapons cutting through space with deadly accuracy. The sound of battle, the booming energy blasts, the crackling explosions, the piercing shrieks of damaged ships filled the Kralth command center. Zorath felt the vibrations of the hits, the weight of every attack, as if it were a blow to his very soul. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be on the receiving end of destruction. Damage reports, Zorath barked. Shields are holding for now, Ambassador, came the response. But their weapons are more powerful than anticipated. Several of our forward ships are damaged. We may lose them soon if they continue this onslaught. Zorath clenched his fists, his mind racing. The Kralth were losing ground. The humans had proven far more resilient than anyone could have predicted. A sudden burst of energy rocked the ship, and alarms blared. Zorath staggered, gripping the console to steady himself. The screen before him flashed with red warning lights. What happened? He demanded. Direct hit from their flagship, the officer replied. Our aft shields have been breached. Damage is substantial. Zorath's eyes flickered to the screen, watching as the human flagship, the Phoenix, unleashed a devastating strike, its weapons disintegrating entire Kralth vessels in seconds. The human ships were efficient, but they were also relentless. Zorath could feel the weight of every blast, each one tearing into his fleet like a wound that would never heal. We can't hold them much longer, Sorb said, his voice grim. Their fleet is overwhelming us. Zorath's thoughts were in turmoil. The Kralth were losing, and no matter how many ships they threw at the humans, they couldn't match their strength. The humans had somehow managed to combine speed, firepower, and strategy in a way that Zorath had never anticipated. But the battle was far from over. Zorath's eyes flared with a new burning resolve. He had never backed down from a challenge, and today would not be the first time. "We will not be defeated by a species that's only just discovered the stars," Zorath growled, his voice laced with fury. "Prepare for a counterattack. We may have underestimated them, but we will not be beaten." As he turned to issue orders to his officers, the reality of the situation was beginning to settle in. The humans were not just another enemy to conquer. They were something entirely new, something the Kralth were not prepared for, and that made them the most dangerous adversary Zorath had ever faced. The tides of war. The sound of explosions reverberated through the walls of the Kralth command center. Zorath stood at the center of the chaos, his eyes fixed on the screen as his fleet continued to clash with humanity's relentless armada. He could feel his grip tightening on the console, the heat of the battle spreading through his entire body. The Kralth warships, once invincible, now seemed vulnerable, their hulls crumbling under the force of humanity's weaponry. His fleet was no longer advancing, it was retreating. Zorath's officers scrambled to keep up with the damage reports, their voices rising in panic as Kralth ships were torn apart by the precision of human fire. No longer were the Kralth invincible conquerors, now they were merely surviving. "Report," Zorath barked, his voice barely above the shrill alarms ringing through the ship. "Forward shields failing. Ambassador, the human flagship the Phoenix has disabled 3 of our capital ships. We're taking damage faster than we can repair it." The officer's voice wavered, an edge of fear creeping in. Zorath clenched his teeth. He had known this battle wouldn't be easy, but never in his worst nightmares had he imagined this level of devastation. The human fleet was like a storm, unpredictable, powerful, and relentless. Every movement they made was calculated, and every strike they launched seemed to hit its mark. The Kralth fleet, built on centuries of dominance, was now being outclassed by a species that had only recently emerged from the shadows of their own world. "We need to counterattack," Zorath said, his voice steely. "Prepare the dreadnoughts. We'll break their line." Sorv, his second-in-command, stepped forward, his face grim. "Ambassador, we've lost more than half of our fighters. The dreadnoughts may not hold up against their firepower. The humans are too well coordinated." Zorath's eyes burned with determination. "We have no choice. We can't retreat. We must break their morale. If we can shatter their line, we can win this." Sorv hesitated for a moment before nodding. He knew better than anyone that once Zorath had made up his mind, nothing could change it. "As you command, Ambassador." The crew worked quickly, sending out the remaining dreadnoughts and fighters, preparing them for what would surely be their final assault. Zorath could feel the weight of each decision pressing down on him. His fleet was dwindling, his options running out. And yet, he couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. He wasn't ready to accept defeat, not yet, not while there was still a chance. As the Kralth ships prepared for the counterattack, Zorath's thoughts returned to the human commander, Ryan Clark. What was it about these humans that made them so powerful? They weren't just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with conviction. They fought for something beyond survival. They fought for their place in the galaxy, for their future. The Kralth had always conquered, always taken, but they had never truly fought for something greater than themselves. "Ambassador, the humans are preparing a massive assault," one of the officers said urgently. "Their fleet is positioning itself for a decisive strike." Zorath's eyes flickered to the screen. The human ships were gathering, forming a tight formation that seemed almost too perfect. They were preparing for something big, something that would end this battle once and for all. "We can't let them get the first blow," Zorath muttered. "Engage all remaining ships. We'll hit them before they have a chance to launch." The Kralth fleet surged forward, moving with a sense of desperation. The dreadnoughts led the charge, their massive cannons firing in unison, lighting up the void with intense energy. The human fleet responded immediately, their ships scattering and then regrouping, moving with the precision of a unit well practiced in the art of warfare. The battle became a blur of flashing lights, energy beams, and the sounds of destruction. Krulth's ships fired relentlessly, but humanity's ships absorbed the blows, only to retaliate with even greater force. The Phoenix, the human flagship, cut through the space between the two fleets like a predator hunting its prey, its weapons flaring with intensity. Zorath could feel the weight of every strike, each one hammering against his fleet's defenses. But then, a sudden shift. Zorath's eyes widened as he saw the humans' formation break apart. They weren't retreating, they were advancing. A line of ships, led by the Phoenix, broke through the Krulth ranks, bypassing their defenses with frightening speed. "Ambassador," Xorv shouted, his voice strained. "Their flagship is targeting our command center. They're coming straight for us." Zorath's blood ran cold. The humans were going for the heart of the Krulth fleet. If the Phoenix broke through, it would spell the end. "Bring all remaining firepower to bear," Zorath roared. "We cannot let them take us down." The final minutes of the battle were nothing short of chaos. Krulth ships fired desperately, but the human fleet moved with a fluidity that made it almost impossible to hit them. One by one, Krulth vessels were torn apart, their hulls disintegrating under the relentless onslaught. Zorath stood in the command center, watching as the Krulth fleet crumbled. His hands were shaking, his mind racing. Was this really happening? Had they truly underestimated humanity this much? And then, through the smoke and debris of the battlefield, Zorath saw it. The Phoenix, now mere kilometers away, closing in on the Krulth command ship with terrifying speed. "This is it," Zorath whispered, his heart hammering in his chest. "We fight until the end." With everything on the line, the last wave of Krulth fighters surged forward, all guns blazing. But it was clear to Zorath that even this final effort might not be enough. The last stand. The void of space had become a deadly theater of war. Zorath could hear nothing but the pounding in his head, the screams of sirens blaring through the ship as the Krulth fleet crumbled around him. His eyes were fixed on the view screen, where the monstrous silhouette of the Phoenix grew ever closer, its weapons flaring with deadly intent. This was it, the final assault. The Krulth dreadnoughts were firing relentlessly, but humanity's ships were swift, agile, and precise. It was clear that the Krulth's might wasn't enough to overcome the human strategy. Zorath clenched his fists, his fingers digging into the console, feeling every vibration as his empire was shattered piece by piece. "Ambassador, the flagship is closing in on us." Xorv's voice came through with an edge of panic. The walls of the command center shook as another explosion rocked the ship. "The Phoenix is targeting our reactor." Zorath's heart pounded in his chest. They were moments away from losing everything. The Krulth Empire, everything he had ever known, was on the brink of extinction. He had led the Empire to countless victories. But this was different. The humans were not just another enemy. They were something far worse, relentless, unwavering, and now they were about to claim victory. But Zorath refused to go down without a fight. "Prepare the last of our fighters," Zorath ordered. "We'll make our stand at the heart of the fleet." Xorv hesitated, but only for a moment. "Are you sure, Ambassador? Our forces are nearly depleted. The humans will tear us apart." Zorath turned sharply, meeting Xorv's gaze. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, a resolve born of desperation. "We will not fall like this. We fight, or we die. That is the Krulth way." Xorv nodded solemnly. "As you command." The last wave of Krulth fighters launched with a roar, their engines roaring as they sped into the fray, a desperate effort to hold back the tide. Zorath's command ship, the Dominator, surged forward with its remaining weapons firing, its powerful beams lighting up the blackness of space like bright, dying stars. But humanity's forces weren't slowing down. The Phoenix came in with a devastating barrage of firepower, sending shockwaves across the Krall fleet. Zorath felt the shuddering impact reverberate through his bones. A massive explosion erupted just to the side of his ship, sending debris flying in all directions. He saw his fleet crumbling, one ship at a time. The dreadnoughts were falling, some to the deadly precision of human gunfire, others consumed by the sheer force of humanity's numbers. Zorath's vision blurred as the smoke of the battle clouded the viewport, and the sounds of war were drowned out by the ringing in his ears. And then, it happened. A blinding light filled the screen as the Phoenix unleashed its final weapon. The beam sliced through the remaining Krall ships with terrifying efficiency, cutting through them like paper. Zorath watched in helpless disbelief as his flagship, the Dominator, was struck. A massive explosion shook the entire ship, sending shockwaves that rattled Zorath's very bones. His world went black for a split second, and when he opened his eyes, the view screen was filled with nothing but the debris of his empire. The Krall fleet was gone. The Dominator was gone. The Krall had lost. Zorath's breath came in ragged gasps. The command center was dark now, the flickering lights barely illuminating the devastation around him. The few remaining Krall officers stood in stunned silence, eyes wide, mouths agape. There was no victory here, only defeat. The last of their ships were being torn apart, their shields failing, their weapons silenced. He had led them into battle, but he had also led them to destruction. The transmission from the human fleet came through next. This time, it wasn't a threat or a challenge. It was something else entirely, something Zorath had not anticipated. Zorath, Commander Clark's voice came through, calm, resolute. We've won. You fought valiantly, but in the end, your empire could not withstand the human will. This is the end of the Krall. We won't wipe you out, but know this. Your empire's days are over. Zorath stared at the screen, his heart heavy. The war was over, and humanity had emerged victorious. But there was no celebration, no fanfare. There was only the bitter taste of failure. The dawn of a new era. Zorath stood alone in the quiet of the shattered command center, his once proud empire reduced to ruins. The walls of the ship were still smoking from the final explosions, and the remnants of the Krall fleet drifted in the cold silence of space. The distant stars seemed distant for the first time in his life. All the years of conquest, the endless victories, the certainty of the Krall as the supreme force of the galaxy, gone. He looked down at the cold floor, the hum of the ship's failing systems the only sound left. For the first time, Zorath felt the weight of his failure fully. He had led the Krall to war with pride. But now, there was only an emptiness, an overwhelming silence that filled every corner of his mind. The transmission flickered back to life, and Commander Ryan Clark appeared once again. His calm face filled the screen, a stark contrast to the destruction surrounding Zorath. Zorath, Clark's voice came through, steady, with no sign of triumph. The battle is over. Your fleet is no more. We won. But the question is, what happens now? Zorath didn't respond immediately. What could he say? The Krall were broken. He was broken. His empire had failed. Yet, beneath the anger and the devastation, there was something else. Something stirring, a feeling he hadn't experienced before. Uncertainty. We are not finished, human, Zorath finally said, his voice rough but filled with something new, a flicker of defiance. The Krall may be defeated, but we will not be erased. We will rebuild. Clark nodded, his expression unchanged. That's not up to you anymore. It's up to all of us. The galaxy has changed, Zorath. The time of conquering is over. There's a new order now. And you, your people, you have a choice to make. Zorath's mind spun as Clark's words echoed in his thoughts. A choice. What choice was there left? The Krall had ruled by strength alone. How could they change now? And yet, for the first time, A faint glimmer of something, hope, perhaps, began to creep into his heart. Could it be possible? Could they really change? The humans won't destroy you, Clark continued, his eyes locking onto Zorath's. But you have to earn your place in this galaxy, Zorath. Through cooperation, through unity. No one rules over anyone else anymore. The universe is a shared space now. The era of one race dominating another is over. Zorath stood tall, the words hanging heavy in the air. He thought back to the battles, the destruction, the pride he had felt as he watched his fleet tear through galaxies. But now, there was no pride in that. Now there was a sobering realization. The galaxy was too vast for one species to rule alone. It was too vast for any one empire to control. Perhaps in the ashes of the Kralth, something new could rise, something that would last. A long silence passed between them. Zorath's gaze hardened, and he spoke with a new clarity, his voice stronger than before. Then we will learn. We will adapt. And we will prove that the Kralth are not a relic of the past. We will prove that even in our defeat, we can become something more. Clark seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded. That's the spirit, Zorath. You may not have won this war, but you can win the future. The galaxy is open to those who are willing to evolve. Zorath looked out into the cold expanse of space once more. His fleet was gone, his empire shattered. But for the first time in his life, he felt something stir within him, an urge to rebuild, to create something new from the ashes of his past mistakes. The Kralth were no longer the conquerors of the galaxy. But perhaps in this new era, they could become something even more powerful, an ally to the very species they had once sought to dominate. Zorath turned back to the screen, meeting Clark's gaze one last time. We will learn, human, and we will join this new galaxy on our own terms. With that, the transmission ended, and Zorath was left alone in the silence of his once great ship. The last of the Kralth fleet drifted in the void, and for the first time, Zorath looked upon the stars not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. The war was over, but a new journey had just begun.